In one of the previous parts, I promised to explain in detail the appearance of sand on Earth in large quantities and present documentary evidence, which seems to be non-existent. And the time has come. Earlier, I expressed the assumption that a massive asteroid fell on our planet in the not-so-distant past, which previously disintegrated in orbit and fell in parts. First, large fragments, leaving craters, then clay, and then sand. The catastrophe was not instantaneous, as many would like to think. It spanned centuries. After the breakup in orbit and the fall of large fragments, a whole ring of dense accretion disk remained, consisting of very small particles of clay and sand. But under the influence of gravity, this mass gradually decreased and finally entered the atmosphere. By that time, many years, possibly even centuries, should have passed since the catastrophe. Clay was the heaviest fraction, so it fell first, mixing with atmospheric water. It fell to the surface. And while it was in a liquid state, it filled all the lowlands, buildings, settlements, cities. But the main lowland is the ocean. Therefore, the main mass of clay went there, squeezing out the water there and causing a rise in the ocean level by tens of meters. But there was another disk of asteroid remains left on the orbit, consisting of quartz sand. It was lighter than clay, so it was launched slower. That is, a few more decades passed, maybe even centuries. In the end, this sand began to enter the atmosphere. Since the accretion disk predominantly formed along the plane of Earth's ecliptic, from one tropic to the other, the main mass of sand fell out exactly there. But not all. Either way, more or less, but sand covered the entire Earth. But when exactly did this happen? We have some evidence of a clay flood, enigmatic statues in Europe depicting clay falls, messages in traditions and myths following the flood picture, and engravings of ruinists such as Piranesi and Robert Hubert. But then it turns out that if the clay fell in the Middle Ages, then the sandfall must be a very recent history. In any case, by this point, humanity has already survived and should have invented the printing press. And this means that there must be printed evidence. And they exist. There are not as many as we would like. It's noticeable how certain mysterious forces tried to erase the memory of it. Moreover, they continue to erase to this day. Nevertheless, such tangible evidence exists. And now we will look at some of them as examples of articles in the weekly magazine World Illustration, published from 1869 to 1890. This publication is interesting in that it reported news from around the globe, including politics, news, events, and discoveries in all spheres. It was some kind of prototype of the modern newsfeed. But most importantly, it didn't emerge from nothing. It was an analog and adaptation of the English, German, and French versions that already existed at that time. However, sifting through these materials is highly challenging. The Russian edition alone consists of 59 volumes, each with over 400 pages of text. That is a total of more than 25,000 pages, and each one needs to be read and studied. Moreover, some volumes have strangely disappeared, but from the fragments that remain from the disappeared volumes, it can be understood why this happened. And of course, it will take me years to fully study all the archives, which is why I will be providing you with information as it comes in. However, I digress. After all, we're talking about sand from the sky. Let's first get a mental picture of exactly what we're looking for. Sand falling from the sky is naturally occurring, but besides that, we're quite happy with cosmic grains, for example, unexpected sand, unknown origin, right? Or any concurrent meteorological phenomena that could have been caused by high concentrations of heavy impurities in the air. So they left in the year 1869, Volume 1. There is no winter this year. In January, the rivers broke free from the ice. In Warsaw, crows started to appear on the 1st of February, the 30th of January. The Kerch Strait thawed out from the ice and navigation opened up. On the 25th of January, flowers bloomed in Kiev, and on the 7th or 8th of February, cherries and apples began to blossom. Insects crawled out into the light, and later field beetles and drones. Rapeseed is growing. On page 287, we are informed about recurring sandstorms in Naples, Calabria, and Sicily. The speed of the wind is more than 13 meters per second. That's roughly 60 kilometers per hour. It is also reported there that this sand was brought from Africa. Now, presumably, such an explanation would have been satisfying, but things aren't that simple. On page 26, there is a drawing from Nature N. Velajiva depicting the streets of Tashkent. Look at these, for lack of a better word, streets. Everything is buried under a several-meter layer of soil, under which you can vaguely make out some structures. Tom 2. There is news of a meteorite of enormous size from the moon in Athens, Greece. It's getting warmer in England. The Gulf Stream changes its course. A. On page 23, they show us Sevastopol, more precisely ruins, the ancient ruins of Sevastopol. Everywhere there are shattered marble columns, I underline, not brick, but marble. The engraving is called Stay of the Tsar's Family in Crimea, Volume 3, 1870 year. Again, an unusually warm winter and flooding in Astrakhan and the South Caspian. The water rose by 3 meters. In the 5th volume, we are informed that on October 12th in Uratub, Tajikistan, such a dense cloud of dust descended on the earth that nothing could be seen within 3 steps. On February 14th in the gully of Kusari, Azerbaijan, small hail fell, in which they found pieces of dust and stone after it melted. The winter of the year 1872 was particularly interesting. Cholera broke out in Egypt. Sand rains again in Italy, but this time they are explained by the eruption of Vesuvius. Sand rain also fell on Sicily. From Messina to Syracuse, that's from 300 to 450 kilometers south of Vesuvius. Also some kind of dry bluish-colored haze was in Urbino. That's 350 kilometers away from Vesuvius, but to the north. This anomaly accounts for the vast amount of fine meteorites and lightning hundreds of kilometers away from Vesuvius itself. From Montpellier to Syracuse, throughout thousands of kilometers, the whole of Italy was covered by a layer of clouds, from which rained and ash rain, lightning swirled, and also the temperature dropped. This happened from the 17th to the 19th of April, and already after a week with a small, on the 8th of May, in the same issue, it is reported that Vesuvius has calmed down and extinguished. Around the same time, a miraculous flooding occurs in Prague a week later, judging by the engravings, more similar to a tsunami. 6 weeks later, the Prague disaster happened again. At the same time in Peter, there was a severe hurricane. Swirls rose on Lake Bodin in Switzerland, and in Stavropol there was a hailstorm so powerful that it pierced iron roofs. Up to 2,000 birds and various animals have been killed. For hail to pierce iron roofs, hailstones must fall at an enormous speed, and to be precise, not from water. Well, or the size of a soccer ball, every one of them. In early 1872, in America, roughly 14 kilometers from the port of St. Augustine in Florida, at low tide on the ocean floor, remains of a sunken city were found. Numerous walls of sunken houses were found there. It is unknown who and when built the city. That same year in New York, on the night from the 9th to the 10th of August, a full rain of meteors occurred. Over the city, 2,040 meteors passed in 4 hours. All this was accompanied by a loud noise and thunder. Most of the meteorites were yellow in color, and the largest ones were white. Well, scientists will tell you that in August, the Earth passes through the Perseids meteor stream, but meteor stream consists of particles the size of dust, and this doesn't pair up with the noise and thunder of their fall. By the way, we will talk about meteor streams separately. In that same year, a bloody rain fell around the French town of Bourgogne. The analysis showed the presence of iron compounds of aluminum, silicon, and carbon in the raindrops. That is exactly the same composition that, in my opinion, the asteroid was made of. Where could these compounds have come from in the atmosphere? On the 28th of November of the same year, a heavy meteor shower also passed over Alexandria, Egypt. According to rough estimates, about 20 fell per minute for more than 5 hours. Many of them were as bright as Jupiter and left a long streak of light as they fell. On the 14th of August, 1873 in the south of Voronezh Oblast, during a completely quiet weather, a dark cloud was observed, lit by occasional flashes of blinding lightning without thunder. When this cloud covered the city of Bogachar, it suddenly became warmer, and a comet with a long black tail appeared between the clouds of this cloud. Don't ask me what it was, I don't know. On October 2nd of that same year, in the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean on the coast of America, a hurricane raged with such force that it destroyed more than 1,000 shiploads, 9,000 houses, and killed more than 600 people. This list can go on for a long time, but I have tried to only slightly sketch the situation that is happening in the world at that moment. A huge part of strange and mysterious phenomena I did not indicate. Only those that can vaguely hint at the existence of sand rains, ongoing meteor activity, unstable behavior of the atmosphere, the presence of foreign traces of quartz oxidants, aluminum and iron in the atmosphere. In other words, just the recently entered sand of immense power in the atmosphere, meteor streams cascading down to Earth. And how, in your opinion, should the entry into the atmosphere of an accretion disk made up of a huge number of small residual particles of an asteroid look like from Earth? Yes, exactly like that. But skeptics can shatter each of these facts one by one. Yes, I can do it myself. What's there to say? We need something more serious. It'll be more serious, but we'll have to strain our brains a bit. Of course, many of you have come across a feature in the journal Worldwide Illustration, in which they talk about the Sahara Desert. But this mysterious issue just disappeared, or did it? I had to spend months of work sifting through volume after volume, page after page. And finally, I stumbled upon the first mention of the year 1785, volume 13, page 355, 360, I quote. The question raised last year about the possibility of turning the Sahara Desert into a sea has now been definitively resolved. Captain Reuter, dispatched for investigation, accompanied by the renowned tourist and scholar Duvert, reports that the execution of the project is possible and that the necessary canal from the Mediterranean Sea to the desert will continue. Just 16 verses. And nothing more, but this is already a lot. However, we are looking further 1,875 years, volume 14, page 127. A meeting was recently held in London's Minshan Gauze to discuss a plan to open Central Africa for trade and civilization. With this in mind, it is proposed to carry the waters of the Atlantic Ocean to the Sahara Desert by breaking through a comparatively narrow sandy elevation that separates the lower part of this steppe from the ocean near Cape Juby, opposite the Canary Islands. Competent people assert that this plan is entirely feasible. The distance from the western shore to Timbuktu through the Sahara steppe is 800 miles. And if the sand elevation, which is no more than 5 or 6 miles wide, is carved by a canal, free trade path to the very center of Africa will open up for European trade, and human trade can be eradicated in this part of the world. They assure that this enterprise will be much easier to complete than the excavation of the Suez Canal. So far, trade with Central Africa has been conducted through the steppe from the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, and caravans coming from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and other northern ports. In the Kingdom of Sudan, several months are spent on this dangerous journey. Despite such difficulties, England sends 3 million of its goods to Sudan every year. The Kingdom of Sudan has 12 million inhabitants, and therefore the importance of opening this part of Africa for trade cannot be doubted. It is proposed that Timbuktu, located on the edge of the steppe, could serve as the most convenient trade center in these regions. Year 1876, Volume 15, page 55. It speaks of a French traveler, Paul Soleil, who was the first from Europe to cross the Sahara directly, without even changing his clothes once. In his words, this country, space equal to Europe without Russia, is characterized by a very healthy climate and is not as desert as everyone thinks. In the Sahara, even in the most parched places by the sun, Soleil found numerous and very curious crevices, attesting to a fairly high degree of education. Then Lieutenant Cameron crossed all of Africa from east to west to the mouth of the Congo. He hardly suffered from the exhaustive journey, and overall his venture could be considered quite successful. 1876, Volume 16, page 153. He informs us that both France and England have sent expeditions to Africa to explore the possibility of its colonization. The English expedition found this venture to be feasible, while the French expedition, headed to the mountainous region between Algeria and Sudan, discovered historical artifacts there. Year 877, Tom 17, page 353, reports to us that other countries, in particular Belgium, Spain, Germany, Portugal, and the United States, are also outfitting a similar expedition to Africa with the same objective. So this is not a joke. At the end of the 19th century, many leading countries were interested in colonizing the Sahara with the purpose of facilitating trade routes. All that was needed was to dig canals into the interior of the continent from the Mediterranean Sea, about 30 kilometers, or from the Atlantic Ocean, about 10 kilometers long. Expeditions were carried out, proving such a possibility. So what happened? Why didn't this happen? Perhaps the expeditions just pocketed the money and reported unverified data. However, we read black on white that trade caravans regularly traveled the Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Sudan route. The traders certainly knew the terrain, and it made no sense for them to lie to themselves. Moreover, the trade brought revenue that was planned to be increased even more. So what happened? Sand rains, meteor showers, and dust from the sky happened. The very thing that was barely mentioned in every issue. Moreover, some articles outright state that sand rains are a common occurrence in Africa. But we don't see this. A beautiful logical tool, finally slicing away all that is superfluous, called wit. Akwam and uneducated hands turned into a fool's mace that knocks out everything. By the way, what's the deal with the Suez Canal? Has anything been written about it? Yes, Volume 3, page 35, tells us about the opening of this canal. And on one of the engravings depicting the arrival of the French Empress for the opening, the ancient temples almost completely buried in sand. Here, for example, Volume 11, page 258. We are informed that on the 19th of March, it snowed in Suez. And now there's suddenly sand in the Sahara. The profile of heights along the trade caravans and the desired filling shows heights from 50 to 600 meters above sea level. Average level is 400 meters of sand. It's impossible to cross the Sahara on foot in any direction. Filling it in is unrealistic. One could say that trade companies from England, France, Belgium, United States, Portugal, and Germany are simply naive idiots. One could say that the trade caravans that left from Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria across the Sahara to Sudan in reality never went anywhere. And they deceived their masters, digging out money, apparently in the neighboring Bahrain. And overall, the publishers of a weekly magazine, which was available on all continents, are simply storytellers. And only the sand in the Sahara was always there. You can open your eyes and see the events that happened not even in the 17th, 18th centuries, but quite recently, literally 120 years ago. What has changed? Why don't we remember this? Maybe because all memory was wiped out by 2 world wars in a row. And why are the most interesting volumes of this journal mysteriously disappearing from libraries, as scholars do not hide? Of course, in this video, I told and showed far from everything. The number of engravings depicting cities buried in sand in the archives is simply staggering. And I will periodically show selections. Friends, none of us are afraid of mistakes. And if you see a mistake in my logic, don't hesitate. Clearly, grammatically, and without typos. Leave your angry comment under the video.